The main topic of this screencast will cover the four main events responsible for the intrinsic pacemaking ability of the heart. Before we talk about the cellular mechanisms responsible for the intrinsic pacemaking ability of the heart, it is important to put this topic in perspective of cardiac rhythm. Cardiac rhythm. Before we discuss cardiac rhythm, what exactly is rhythm? Rhythm in a colloquial sense, according to dictionary.com, is a movement or procedure with uniform or pattern recurrence of a beat, accent, or the like. Essentially, rhythm is a repeated, patterned phenomenon that happens in a predictable manner. For cardiac rhythm, there are four characteristics that define it physiologically. The first is, for cardiac rhythm, that the heartbeat must occur at a particular frequency in a given amount of time. For the resting heart, the physiological heart rate is somewhere between 60 to 100 beats per minute. Below 60 beats per minute and it's considered bradycardia. Above 100 beats per minute and it's considered tachycardia. Another component of normal cardiac rhythm is the origin of the heartbeat. Physiologically, the origin is the SA node. That is why the SA node is often called the pacemaker of the heart. Another characteristic that defines normal cardiac rhythm is the conduction pathway. The conduction pathway, physiologically, starts at the SA node, then goes to the AV node, through the bundle of His, and finally to the Purkinje fibers, to the rest of the myocardium. At the figure on the top, the SA node is shown here. This, again, is where the origin of the heartbeat starts. From the SA node, the signal transmits to the AV node. From the AV node, it goes to the bundle of His and through the Purkinje fibers. At the picture on the left, the SA node is here. From the SA node, the signal transmits through the atria to the AV node. The AV node is located at the junction between the atria and the ventricles. From the AV node, the signal goes through the bundle of His, through the Purkinje fibers, to the ventricular myocardium. A last characteristic that defines cardiac rhythm is the velocity. What I mean by that is not only must the signal follow a particular conduction pathway, but when it does so, it must follow at a particular velocity. As it goes from the SA to AV node, the signal must transmit at a moderate velocity. At the AV node, there's a slight delay. This delay allows the ventricles to fill with blood. And from the AV node, through the bundle of His and through the ventricular myocardium, the speed goes really fast. In summary, from the SA node to the AV node, it's going at medium to moderate velocity. At the AV node, there's a delay of about 0.1 seconds. And from the AV node through the ventricular myocardium, the signal moves really fast. Now that we have talked about the four characteristics of cardiac rhythm, let's particularly pay attention to the origin of the cardiac rhythm. The origin. What is it about certain tissues in the heart that allows them to originate a heartbeat? We're going to get to the specific cellular mechanisms that allow the SA node to be the signal generator. But before we go into that, let's break the cardiac tissues into two types. Cardiac tissues can be broken down into tissues that display automaticity and those that do not display automaticity. Tissues that display automaticity are the SA node, the AV node, the bundle of His, and the Purkinje fibers. Tissues that do not display automaticity are the atrial and ventricular myocardium. First, let's look at the action potential of a tissue that does not display automaticity, so then we can compare and contrast it to tissues that do display automaticity so we can better understand the cellular mechanisms. So first we shall be talking about the atrial and ventricular myocardial action potential. This is the typical action potential for a tissue in the heart that does not display automaticity, so an atrial or ventricular myocardial cell. Imagine that this is one of the atrial myocyte. Its action potential can be broken down into 5 phases. Phases 0, through 4. Phase 4 is the resting phase. At resting phase, the cell sits around somewhere around negative 96 millivolts. This is the nurse potential for the potassium ion. Let me quickly explain the axes. The y-axis is millivolts, and the x-axis is time. Since there is no change in millivolts per given time, this means that there is no net transfer of ions across the membrane during phase 4. Then something occurs that allows the cell to go from a resting potential to the threshold value. Imagine that the threshold value is shown by this blue line right here. That something is due to the connections between this myocyte and an adjacent myocyte or an adjacent tissue that displays automaticity via gap junction. When positive cations enter from the gap junction and push this myocyte towards the threshold value, then voltage-gated sodium channels open and allow a rapid influx of sodium ions. This explains the phase 0 or the depolarization phase. After phase 0 is the plateau phase. The plateau phase is due to calcium entering the cell at the same time potassium leaving it. Again, there's not much change in voltage per given time. After the plateau phase is the repolarization phase due to the outward efflux of potassium with no counter influx of calcium. Therefore, the cell goes back near the potassium nurse potential, and we're now back again at the resting phase. This is a tissue that does not display automaticity. In tissues that do display automaticity, there needs to be an intrinsic ability for the cell to go from phase 4 to phase 0. Therefore, in tissues that do display automaticity, phase 4 is unstable and is shown by this blue line or slope. This is the typical action potential of a tissue in the heart that does display automaticity. Notice how it has an unstable phase 4. This instability allows the cell to go from a resting potential to a threshold value without external influences. That is to say that if you take the SA node and cut it right here and put it in a bucket of solution with electrolyte fluids, it will continuously undergo depolarization in a repeated pattern over and over again. It does not need any neurohumoral mechanisms to signal it to undergo depolarizations. So what exactly is responsible for this unstable phase 4? There are 4 main reasons why this cell will undergo this depolarization. The first and the most important is the conductance through the funny channel. This funny channel opens every time the cell goes back to its resting potential. When the cell goes back to its resting potential, the funny channel opens, allowing sodium and calcium ions to come inside the cell. These positive cations allow the cell to go to a more positive potential. A second important characteristic that allows for this depolarization is near the end of phase 4, the L and T-type calcium channels open. T-type calcium channels. These calcium channels allow the influx of calcium inside the cell, again bringing positive cations into the cell. Another mechanism responsible for this instability right here is due to the decrease in potassium efflux. The closing of potassium channels allows a decrease in efflux of positive cations, again maintaining positivity inside the cell. Finally, there's timed calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. This timed release again puts positive cations inside the cell. However, amongst these 4, the main 2 important events responsible for the depolarization are the funny channel and the L and T type calcium channels. Thank you for listening.